When Caroline appears on Vanessa Cross's talk show, the audience expects another one of her inspiring interviews. But Vanessa isn't interested in inspiration. She wants to provoke, challenge, and expose White House press secretaries most vulnerable. What was supposed to be a calm conversation could turn into something much bigger. But what Vanessa doesn't know is that in just a few minutes, she would be the one left speechless. What she would say that night would change everything, and no one in the audience would ever forget it. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The story begins with the air inside the packed television studio was thick with anticipation, but beneath the polite smiles and hushed conversations, something else simmered beneath the surface. Tonight's show was different. It wasn't meant to be just another polished primetime interview. It was a trap. The bright stage lights beamed down onto the glossy circular desk at the center of the set, their glow making everything feel just a little too sharp, a little too staged. The walls of the studio were lined with eager spectators, some clutching neatly printed cue cards that bore Karoline Leavitt's name, while others sat with arms crossed, waiting, watching. Because this wasn't just an interview, this was a battle, and Karoline Leavitt, former White House press secretary, outspoken conservative, the youngest woman ever to hold her position, was walking straight into the lion's den. At the opposite end of the stage, seated in a leatherback chair, was Eleanor Vaughn. Cold, calculated, brutal. For years, Eleanor had made a name for herself as one of the most ruthless talk show hosts in the country. She had an artful way of twisting words, baiting her guests into saying something that could be edited, spun, weaponized against them. And tonight, her target was Caroline, a conservative firebrand, a woman unapologetic in her values, a rising political voice who had already stood on the world's biggest stage and faced down an army of critics. But Eleanor wasn't here to talk about policy. She wasn't here for a fair discussion. She was here to break her down, to discredit her, to make sure the world saw Caroline as just another name to be mocked, ridiculed, and dismissed. The cameras panned to the side entrance. The studio doors swung open. Karoline Leavitt stepped in. The crowd erupted into applause, but there was an edge to it, a mix of genuine admiration and simmering hostility. She walked forward with measured steps, her posture unwavering, her confidence unshaken. There was no trace of nervousness in her stride. She had been here before. She had stood in war rooms, briefing rooms, press pits, debates, and she had survived far worse than a talk show host with an agenda. As she approached the curved interview desk, she met Eleanor's gaze without blinking. The talk show host smirked slightly, her polished nails tapping against the stack of cue cards in front of her. She was ready to attack. What she didn't realize, so was Caroline. And the first strike, a battle in disguise, has coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor's voice rang out smoothly, her tone dripping with theatrical professionalism. "Tonight we have a very special guest. She's a woman who has made quite the name for herself in politics, a former White House press secretary, and a rising star in conservative circles. Let's welcome Karoline Leavitt." The audience clapped, some enthusiastically, others more reserved. Caroline took her seat, crossing one leg over the other, her hands resting lightly on the desk. She didn't fidget. She didn't adjust her hair. She simply watched Eleanor. And Eleanor? She watched her back, but with a different kind of stare. The kind that said, "I'm about to rip you apart." The camera zoomed in. Eleanor tilted her head, flashing that carefully calibrated smile. "Caroline," she began, her voice smooth, "you've been at the center of quite a few political firestorms. You've defended policies that many have called controversial. You've taken strong stances, made bold claims, and faced your fair share of critics." A pause. The audience shifted slightly. Caroline knew what was coming next. "But tell me," Eleanor leaned in, her piercing gaze narrowing, "do you ever wonder if you're just a puppet?" The studio froze. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by an uncomfortable hush. The first strike had landed. It wasn't a question. It was a punch to the gut, designed to discredit, humiliate, and diminish. Eleanor was setting the stage, making it clear that this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be an interrogation. The smirk on Eleanor's face said everything. She expected Karoline to flinch, to stammer, to show even a flicker of uncertainty. But Karoline, she did none of that. She smiled. And that smile, it was dangerous. Calm, poised, unshaken. Karoline leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Eleanor, her tone smooth as silk. I think the real question, Eleanor, is whether you brought me here to have a conversation or a spectacle. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Eleanor's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. She hadn't expected that. Karoline wasn't playing defense. She was flipping the script. Eleanor blinked, regaining her composure. She flipped the cue card in her hand, already moving to the next attack, determined to steer the conversation back into hostile territory. You defend an administration that, let's be honest, has been accused of suppressing voices that don't align with its agenda. She folded her hands together, her voice laced with thinly veiled accusation. Do you ever feel like you're part of that problem? A few heads in the audience nodded slightly. A trap. A carefully laid minefield designed to force Karoline into a defensive position. Karoline tilted her head slightly, as if she were considering the question. Then she spoke. Calm, controlled, but sharp as a dagger. Let me ask you something, Eleanor. A pause. Would you ask that same question to someone from the other side? Or do you only believe in free speech when it's convenient? Silence. The audience stirred. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she forced a laugh, waving off the moment like it was nothing. Oh, Karoline, she purred, her smile returning, always turning things around. But I have to ask. She lifted another cue card, this time with something deeper, something sharper. You were a White House press secretary at such a young age. You had power, influence, yet many people say you were simply placed there as a token, a face rather than a mind, a symbol rather than a strategist. A slow smirk spread across Eleanor's lips. So tell us, what exactly did you do, besides read a teleprompter? The room went still, and in that moment, Eleanor Vaughn thought she had finally landed the knockout blow, but she had no idea what was coming next. The air in the studio thickened, charged with an unspoken tension that wrapped around the room like a vice. Eleanor Vaughn sat back, an easy, almost smug smile curving her lips, her fingers grazing the edges of the cue cards in her lap. She had done it. She had cornered Karoline Leavitt. She had delivered the blow that should have left her scrambling for a defense, faltering, doubting, wavering. But then, Karoline laughed, a soft, knowing chuckle, not nervous, not forced, not the laugh of a woman who had just been exposed. No, it was the laugh of a woman who saw right through the game being played. The audience shifted, some glancing at each other in confusion. Eleanor's smile twitched. Karoline leaned forward, her fingers lightly intertwined, her expression almost amused. You know, Eleanor, she said smoothly, tilting her head slightly, that's an interesting take. But let's be honest, this isn't about me, is it? The smile vanished from Eleanor's face. Just for a second. A flicker of something, uncertainty, discomfort, before she forced the smirk back into place. This is about you. Karoline's voice was velvet and steel, soft yet unyielding. About the fact that your job, this chair, this desk, this whole show, has never been about truth. It's about entertainment. It's about outrage. About making sure people leave here thinking a certain way. Eleanor didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the cue cards in her hands. The audience sat frozen, some on the edge of their seats, others hanging on every word. Karoline's eyes flicked to the camera, her voice dropping just slightly. But let's get real. She paused, letting the silence settle, letting Eleanor feel it. You don't actually want a debate, do you? You don't want answers. You want moments, clips, clicks. You want something that goes viral so that tomorrow morning, every headline reads, Eleanor Vaughn destroys Karoline Leavitt. The studio was deathly silent. Eleanor blinked. Her lips parted slightly as if preparing to counter, but she didn't speak, and Karoline saw it, the hesitation, the crack in the armor. She pressed forward. But here's the thing, Eleanor. Caroline folded her hands together, her voice dropping to a quiet, lethal edge. What happens when that strategy stops working? What happens when people see through it? What happens when they start asking questions about you? Eleanor's smile vanished completely. Her throat bobbed slightly as she swallowed. She flipped the cue card in her hand, her fingers moving a little too fast. The audience was holding its breath. Eleanor Vaughn had spent years controlling conversations, owning rooms. But tonight, she wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. She cleared her throat, flipping through her cue cards as if looking for a way out. She needed a save, a way to regain her authority. Her hands tensed slightly, her nails pressing into the glossy white cards. She had one last shot. All right, Caroline. One last question. Her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. You talk about standing firm in your beliefs, about being fearless in the face of criticism. But when you're alone, when the cameras are off, don't you ever worry that you're on the wrong side of history? A trap, a final landmine. But Caroline didn't flinch. She just smiled, and a beat of silence. Then, history isn't written by people who were popular at the time. Caroline's words sliced through the air like a blade. The audience collectively inhaled. The words hung there, weighty and undeniable. Caroline waited, watching Eleanor. The talk show host, who had spent the entire night playing offense, now sat there, staring. And then, Caroline delivered the final blow. It's written by the people who didn't back down when it mattered. The studio erupted. Some clapped. Others rose from their seats, cheering. The noise rolled through the set like a crashing wave, filling every corner of the room. And Eleanor? She just stared. For the first time in her career, she had no words. She glanced at the camera, as if searching for direction, her mouth opening slightly, but nothing came out. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the exact moment the power shifted, the moment she realized she had lost. Caroline stood, adjusting her blazer with slow, deliberate movements. The audience was still on their feet, the applause refusing to die down. She turned, scanning the crowd of faces, before settling her gaze back on Eleanor. And then, "Thank you for having me." With unshakable grace, she turned and walked off the stage. The applause grew louder, cheers erupting in different pockets of the room. And Eleanor? She sat there, silent. For the first time, the host of the show was the one left speechless. In a world that thrives on tearing people down, true strength isn't found in shouting the loudest. It's found in standing firm, unshaken, when the storm rages around you. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win an argument that night. She exposed the game, the manipulation, the performance disguised as journalism. But more than that, she reminded us all that history is shaped not by those who seek approval, but by those who dare to stand alone when the world demands their silence. And in that moment, as Eleanor Vaughn sat speechless, the audience realized something profound. The truth doesn't need permission to be heard. It simply needs someone brave enough to speak it. If you believe in standing up for your rights, let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that matter.